As a best practice, NLSS strongly suggests that you begin with the configuration of the gateway by running a check update. This step assures that the gateway has the most current version of firmware installed to provide peak performance. The gateway must have access to the internet in order to pull down the update from the NLSS update site. Start by double-clicking on Gateways in the click Check Update in the General tab. If the gateway does not have access to the internet to retrieve the updated firmware, you can download the current firmware from the NLSS website and install it by clicking on the Firmware Update button. Once the Check Update button is selected, a warning message indicates that updating the gateway requires a reboot. The update may take several minutes to complete. Click Yes to continue. After the gateway reboots, log back into the gateway and navigate to the gateway configuration screen. Now that the gateway's firmware is up to date, let's look at the other parameters needed for gateway configuration. The gateway is listed at the top of the gateway configuration screen. The gateway details are divided into 4 tabs: General, Wired Network, Email, and Time. Let's look at the General tab first. Device name: enter a unique name for this NLSS gateway. The gateway model and IP address are listed by default. Device type: the hardware series of the selected NLSS gateway. Firmware version: the firmware version running on the gateway. Available firmware version: this field flashes if a newer version of the gateway's firmware is available for downloading. Hardware version: the hardware version of the gateway. Serial number: the serial number of the gateway, as reported by the gateway. Install date: enter the date this gateway was installed. Installer: enter the name of the person who installed this gateway. Enable SSH: when SSH is enabled, qualified technical support staff can remotely access and troubleshoot the gateway using its SSH username and password. When the technician is finished, simply disable SSH to prevent further access. Note that only super users have permission to enable and disable SSH. As long as SSH is disabled, no one can log into the gateway via SSH, even with an SSH password. To enable SSH, place a checkmark in the box and click Save. An alert is displayed indicating that SSH is enabled. The gateway also displays an alert message when SSH is turned off. Click OK to acknowledge the message. The next option to review is Download System Logs. If you contact NLSS or its authorized representatives for support, a technician might ask for the gateway's system logs to help with troubleshooting. Click on Download System Logs. The gateway displays a message to verify downloading the logs. Click Yes to continue. The gateway compiles the log files into a zip file. Click OK to save the file locally. Provide the information to technical support as instructed. Next is Configuration Backup. Configuration Backup saves all configuration settings in the system to a backup file. You can then use Configuration Restore to reload the settings file and restore the configurations. Click Configuration Backup to create the backup of file. The gateway displays a message to confirm the configuration backup. Click Yes to start the backup. The gateway displays a prompt to save the file locally or on a shared network drive. A best practice is to create a configuration backup after making any changes to the gateway configuration. This step assures that the most updated information is backed up in the event that a restore is needed. Click OK to save the file. Configuration Restore. Configuration Restore resets the system to the configuration settings that were last saved using the Configuration Backup option. Click Configuration Restore to start the process. A message is displayed stating that the gateway is restarted during the process, and is not available. Click Yes to continue with the Configuration Restore. Click Browse to select the configuration file to restore. Click Upload to begin the restoration. The gateway uploads the file and reboots to complete the restoration process. Reboot. To reboot the gateway, click Reboot. The gateway gracefully shuts down and restarts. A warning message is displayed. Click Yes to confirm the reboot request. Shutdown. Use Shutdown to close the gateway OS and power down the unit. A warning message is displayed. Click Yes to continue the shutdown process. System File Check. This process initiates a checkup of the gateway hard drive and file system. Firmware Update. If an internet connection is not available to support automatic firmware updates using the Check Update button, Firmware Update allows the gateway firmware to be updated using a file stored locally on another computer. The process for upgrading the firmware from a file is the same as demonstrated for restoring the gateway from a configuration backup. Browse to locate the firmware update file. Click Upload to begin the firmware update. The gateway uploads the file, installs it and then reboots to complete the installation of the firmware update. This process can take up to 20 minutes to complete. Factory Reset. Factory Reset restores the selected NLSS gateway to its factory state. A factory reset deletes all files and configurations, except for the firmware updates and configuration backups that the gateway has recorded since it left the factory. As a best practice, before restoring an NLSS gateway to its factory state, a configuration backup should be taken to save the configuration settings. After running a factory reset, the gateway's network setting is set back to DHCP. Run the NLSS Discovery tool to rediscover the gateway on the network. The gateway displays a warning message. Click Yes to complete the reset process. As demonstrated earlier, use Check Update to bring the gateway's firmware up to the current version. The update is downloaded from the NLSS Check Update site. Next is the network configuration of the gateway. Click on the Wired Network tab. Enable DHCP. DHCP automatically assigns an IP address and sets the network parameters for the NLSS gateway. Note that if DHCP is enabled, some access control devices may lose connectivity with the gateway if the gateway's IP address changes. Remove the checkmark from the Enable DHCP box to disable DHCP. Disabling DHCP requires manually entering a static IP address and the accompanying network parameters for this gateway. Those parameters are in the following fields which become active when DHCP is disabled. Check with the network administrator for the proper settings. Enter a static IP address. Enter the subnet mask. Enter the default gateway. Enter the primary DNS. Enter the secondary DNS if available. The MAC address and the link speed are entered by the gateway. Click Save to keep the settings. The gateway applies the changes and reboots. Once rebooted, connect to the gateway via a browser using the new IP address. Next is the Email tab. From the Email tab, a test message can be sent by the gateway to verify that messages can be sent from the gateway. The gateway can be configured to notify a user when a certain event occurs. Select a mail server from the drop-down menu. The gateway has the option to send an SMTP or send mail message to a recipient. Messages can be sent for a variety of system events. The email configuration is used as a part of event linkages and actions. Those features are discussed later in this training. Choose the desired communication type. If SMTP is selected, fields are displayed to enter the corresponding SMTP server and email information. Enter the SMTP server name and the password, if required. Enter an email address to test the settings. Click Save to keep the settings. Click Test to send an email to the test recipient to ensure that the settings work properly. The Time tab allows the time to be set for the gateway. Select a time zone from the drop-down list. The gateway's time can be set using Network Time Protocol, or NTP. Select NTP time for the time mode. Enter the path to an NTP server from which the gateway can set its time. As a best practice, it is suggested that NTP time be used to assure that the gateway's time is correct. The gateway's time also can be set manually. Click the calendar button to set the date. Use the arrows to set the time. Save the settings. This concludes the gateway section of global configuration. Please return to the global configuration playlist to begin the review of the next section. Subscriptions.